Okay, good. So now we'll go ahead and get into the lecture. So metta, what is metta? Well, it means loving kindness. That's the way it's often translated. In many ways, just love would be a good translation, but that would be kind of too plain spoken, so we would have a special term. So loving kindness is a special term, and it aptly describes it. Also, friendliness is, I think, a really good translation. So metta and maitri in Sanskrit mean friendliness. Okay, good. So like most meditations, we have a primary object. Well, what is the primary object in metta meditation? It is the mental state, the feeling of, the emotion of loving kindness, of friendliness. That's what we're trying to cultivate and develop. And we use see, hear, and feel to do so. And when I mean see, hear, and feel, I'm not talking about the see, hear, feel practice. I'm talking about we use the visual, we use the auditory, and we use the emotional and somatic to support that, right? So let's go back very briefly into the meditation. So straighten up. And then smile. See, that's the somatic. And now see your beloved person or pet. Now that's the visual. And now say your mantra or say your verbalization. May you be happy. That's the verbal. That's the auditory. And then we're also using and cultivating the emotional, the kind of the mental state of metta. And so see if you can notice metta mind, the state of metta. That's what we're cultivating. And we're using and interpenetrating with all of it together, right? Like the visual, the somatic, the emotional, the auditory. We're mixing it all up in this quality of loving kindness, such to integrate it and cultivate it in our beings. Good. Okay, so here I'm going to go into a long list of reasons why this practice is so valuable. So, okay, here we go. So firstly, we all want happiness, right? We just went over that. Well, this practice in many ways gives you happiness. This directly makes the mind happier and at ease. Let me ask you this. When you experience meeting a friend, or let's do a little mini meditation. So straighten up again and think of a time that you saw a friend that you hadn't seen in like a year or 10 years. And that quality of welcoming, friendliness, receptivity, and really curiosity about them, wanting to know about them. And then is that not happiness? And that quality, this curious, open-hearted, loving, friendly disposition, that is metta. That's what we're cultivating. We're cultivating happiness here and now. And that can be cultivated. That's what should be on the newspaper every day. You can cultivate happiness in your life. Okay, good. It obviously generally makes you kinder with yourself and kinder with others, right? So another huge benefit to metta is it purifies you. Now, there's a part of me that doesn't care for that language because in a sense we're pure as we are. There's nothing wrong with us. But it works through and transmutes our afflictive emotional states. How does it do it? Well, so a teacher of mine, his name's Lama Sid, one of his quotes was, the Dharma works through contrast. So when we do loving kindness practice, we actually get into a little bit of an exalted state of loving kindness. We become more loving and kind in that moment. And then all of a sudden, we can see how we've been harsh, we've been hateful, we've been self-centered, we've been dismissive, etc., right? So again, the Dharma works through contrast. You have to the fish has to first leap out of the water or be taken out of the water to know that it's been in the water, right? George Haas always quotes this. I think it's from the Japanese Zen Buddhist tradition. What water? Asks the fish. Like, if that's what you swim in, that's what you know. You don't think anything of it. So metta is how you get into like a really altered state of loving kindness, and then wow, you see all the material that you need to work on. And that kind of works both ways. That's the good news, bad news of it, right? Okay, good. Now this next point is really important. Metta shows you how to work with your defilements. It shows you how to work with your psychological material that's not been processed. And the way to work with one of the elements that's necessary to work through your material, your psychological stuff, your defilements, is kindness. You can't work through what is stuck inside through anger, cruelty, impatience. It has to be through kindness. That's what you want. That's what you've always wanted. And by developing metta as a skill, you're developing the tool set that will help you kind of eliminate all those defilements. Good. All right, another big benefit of metta is when you become a kinder person, others are attracted to you, and relationships are easier, and loneliness becomes less of a problem. I'm sure that we've all experienced being lonely in a crowd or being lonely while sitting next to someone because we felt we could not connect. Metta helps you connect. Good. Another aspect of metta is, so metta brings about a joy and a bliss. That joy and bliss can also be infused into your other practices and should be. When there is more joy and bliss in your practice, you will enjoy the practice more. When you enjoy the practice more, you're more likely to do it. And if you're more likely to do it, you'll do it more. And the more you do it, the more transformation there will be. I mean, there are other elements like correct practice is important, but just simply volume of practice is very important. Dan Brown calls that, in a kind of quippy way, the odometer approach to awakening. So just log the hours. Well, you're going to log more hours if you enjoy the practice. Okay, so when should you do this practice? So as usual, the recommendation will be to do it 30 minutes every day. If you need to break it up, you can. Also, you can do it in micro-hit form. So you should also do it, off and on during your day. Like maybe when you see somebody, you can just incline the mind towards metta. Say, oh, may you be happy. May you be well. May all things go well for you. Also, additionally, I'm going to suggest that you do a generosity practice. So I would recommend doing 6 acts of generosity every day. And those acts can be as simple and mundane as watering your plants or watering your grass or just being slightly more careful and, courteous in the way that you serve your loved one a meal, right? Just incline the mind towards generosity and act from that place. And then on top of that, do a micro hit of metta. So maybe you're pouring water on your plant. You say, oh, may you be happy. Dear plant, may you benefit from this water. And that would be both an act of generosity and a micro hit of metta. Okay, good. So we've gone over homework. That's good. All right, what should you watch out for in this practice? Well, firstly, I think I like to quote the most important piece of meditation advice I've ever heard is, and this is from Chuladasa, is when the mind wanders, you catch it, and then you just sweetly bring it back, celebrating that you've got it. So remember that. The mind will wander and you just want to sweetly bring it back. Also, something else to consider, and I mentioned this earlier, Subtle is significant. Let me repeat, subtle is significant. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you might not have this roaring fire of metta going, right? It might be very subtle. You might just catch glimmers of kindness. It's fine. We're all practicing. We're all on this trajectory towards of cultivating ourselves. Also, every practice when you start it has a lot of groping and grasping. All of you saw this past week, wow, see here feels a struggle. It wasn't always easy, right? And you see that you've got to be patient with it and just keep moving, keep going through the motions. Okay, good. Oh, this is important. You might feel inauthentic. It might feel phony to you to wish happiness. I felt that. It's no problem. Keep going. Not a problem. This is also important. The ideal of metta is something aspirational. We're striving towards greater metta. And we aspire for it, but we don't use it as a kind of a whip to flagellate ourselves. We don't beat ourselves with it. If you act in a way that is not kind, just see that and be kind to yourself and be happy that you saw it. Don't bear down on yourself saying, well, look, I've been doing this metta meditation and here I am being a cruel jerk again. No, don't use this as a standard to harshly judge yourself. Don't fall into self-reproach. Also, as always, make the practice yours. Do whatever you've got to do to calibrate and retool this practice to fit your needs. Maybe sitting practice doesn't work. Maybe you want to do walking practice, that's fine. Or maybe you want to do lying down practice. Or maybe the verbiage that I suggest doesn't work for you. And if you retool the verbiage, it really will help you find that place of metta. We'll do that. Make the practice your own. Another important point is don't use metta as a justification to drop discriminating wisdom. So we do the metta practice to develop kindness and love, but don't be a doormat, right? Like you want the metta to inform your intentions, but the way you act might need to be very decisive, very clear, and you might not be able, it might be inappropriate to show kindness towards someone at some certain juncture. So I just want to be clear that we need our discriminating wisdom in order to, that couples the metta practice. We need it. Okay, good. So I want to open it up to questions here in a moment. And then before we go into that, I will get into, the actual instructions of how to do metta much more thoroughly here in a moment. But do we have any questions that are coming up around anything else?
I've got a question.
Sure.
So the universal parts of this practice are pretty easy for me to figure out in terms of, meditating on how everybody wants practice, everyone wants happiness. And I want happiness, that's universal. Those are easy. When it comes to the first step of this practice, where you mentioned visualizing uncomplicated relationships, that was difficult for me because as soon as I thought of any modern relationship, I'm like, okay, well, there's complicating factors to like all of these relationships that, there's bits of baggage, as it were, in like idealizing relationships like in nostalgic ways of like, oh yeah, like back in the day, this was like with my old friends when I was a kid, or with my spouse when we were like first together. It's easier in that context. So is that something to be worked through, or is looking at the practice in a nostalgic way an okay way to go about it?
Okay. Yeah, this is a really good question, Dan. So, okay, this is what's coming up for me right now. So the way that I'm going to teach the practice today, or I'm actually going to give two different options. What I'm going to actually suggest is that you just take the uncomplicated person that you have a loving relationship with and just focus on metta towards them to develop like familiarity with metta mind. And to be clear, you can go as far back in time as you want. You can be very nostalgic. You can also actually be very imaginal about it. This doesn't even have to be a real person. I think it's generally better if it is a real person or a pet, but it doesn't have to be a real person, because what we're looking to do is find an ideal object that evokes metta for us, so it's very easy and that it's intuitive. Then the other practice that I'm going to recommend, and this is extremely canonical, kind of traditional, is what you do is you first do it on the easy to love person. Then I always go to a mentor. Then I go to myself, send metta to myself. Then another like beloved person, but it doesn't have to be like someone you have an uncomplicated relationship with. Then you do a few of those. Then on to a neutral party. Then on to the enemy. You can also do a geographic version of it as well. And so what happens is what we want to do first is get established in what is metta mind. And then we start kind of taking that and spreading it out, actually learning to make metta more and more broad, indiscriminate, and unconditional. So to be clear, well, okay, first off, am I speaking to your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was kind of stuck when you mentioned a uncomplicated relationship, where I was like, okay, well, as soon as I went through all of my relationships I could think of, I was like, all of these have some kind of confounding factor that inhibits it. But when I got more idealized with it, like you said, it became easier. So that if that's okay, and if it's more directed on getting that feeling, I understand how to get to that point. I just wasn't sure if that was a kosher within the practice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and then like I think I may have mentioned this, but often children. So if you have kids, you can think back to when they were kids, and like send metta towards that child. So that would be good. So yeah, and then like I said, once that's established, then we start bringing it to the more complicated relationships that we have. Okay, cool. Alrighty. Any other questions?
How does metta relate with compassion, the compassionate heart?
Okay, so the way I think about metta is kind of a friendly, it's like a somewhat undifferentiated generic love. But that doesn't mean to denigrate what it is. But relative to compassion, it's just kind of generic love. Whereas the way I like to think about compassion is what love does when it sees the brokenness of the world. Compassion is what love does when it sees the hurt and suffering of the world. That's the way I think of the two together. And then mudita, maybe some of you have heard about mudita. Mudita is sympathetic joy. And mudita is what love does when it sees the good qualities in others, when it sees the good qualities in the world. It's this kind of celebratory, kind of gushy, like a joyous, delightful type love. Did that speak to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. What other questions are coming up? Alrighty, very good. So let's get on to the how to do the practice. So there's not much to it. I mean, we've effectively already done it. You just simply bring up metta, right? You see the beloved person or beloved object, you smile, and then you say your mantra, and then you make it as immersive as possible. You bring it all on board. And here are some tips for bringing it all on board. So you can just find the quality of loving kindness in the body. Maybe it's there already. Maybe you need to evoke it, activate it. You kind of flip the switch, right? You can also you want to use any support, right? So anything that brings it up, however you bring it up, you bring it up. And then I think the best way to do it is always to come back to this